Hello and welcome back to this writing video where I am walking you through how to write a novella, in this case using Claude. And in the last video I did in this series, which you don't have to watch if you are watching, if this is your first time tuning in, then basically I went through and I got all of this information. This was essentially my first brainstorming session using AI, and I got pretty much the kernel of what the story is going to be about. And now we're going to move on to talk about characters and some of the things we could do with characters in Claude. And then in a later video this week, we will have another video about doing the same thing with a different novella using ChatGPT, and then I will kind of compare the two on how they function for characters. So far with brainstorming, I found them to be more or less the same and just as useful in either case. But there's definitely some strengths and weaknesses to both models, which is why I am writing one novella in Claude and one in ChatGPT. So to get started, we're going to take everything we've got here so far, and we're going to open up a new chat. We could stick to the same chat we used in the beginning, but we're going to open up a new chat and say, the following is a brief summary of a story idea for a novella. And then we'll just paste that in. I'm just going to leave it at that. And it's starting to give me suggestions. I probably should have given it more explicit instructions on what to do. But I'll just ignore this for now. And I'll just say, actually, we want to flesh out the characters a bit more. Now, when it comes to AI, it can help to have a full character profile for your own reference. But I found that for the AI itself, it might be more than you need, particularly because it can run up your token counts and everything like that, especially if you're using ChatGPT. With Claude 2, you have a lot more room to put a lot more information about the character. And so we are going to flesh these out a little bit more than I would normally do for an AI. But first we need to know which characters we want to flesh out. So can you give me a list of characters that would make sense to flesh out for this novella? It says, here are some key characters that we could further develop. The senator's daughter, the senator's wife, Sherlock Holmes himself, Tarzan, the defector, the cult leader. There's some henchmen. And I'm just going to say, let's flesh out the characters for Sherlock Holmes, Watson, Tarzan, and the cult defector, because I feel like those are going to be the most pertinent and interesting to the story. And again, we don't necessarily have to flesh out every single character for the AI to know something of what to do with those characters. But we don't want to just leave it at that. We want to give it a little bit more instruction. Let's start by giving a full paragraph about each, describing their motivations, their role in the story, and other general details. We'll dig in a little bit deeper later. All right, so we're doing Sherlock Holmes. Brilliant but eccentric detective. Now I'm cheating a little bit here using public domain characters that the AI already knows. And so it's already able to tell exactly what it should put here for some of these characters. But here with the cult defectors, where we get a little bit, this isn't something it's pulling from anything in particular. So this is where we're going to want to spend some of our time really fleshing this out. Um, before I do that, I'm going to copy these and I'm going to open up. I'm just going to open up an introduction, put it here, call it characters. And then this is just a little Atticus tip for you. If you go here to include in and then say none, it basically allows you to have chapters to put in your notes that won't appear in the final product. So it won't appear in the ebook or the print book. So this is how I collect my notes in Atticus. It's just a handy way of kind of consolidating everything into one particular space. So let's go through these and figure them out. So the brilliant but eccentric detective becomes invested in the senator's case both due to the intellectual challenge and his prior knowledge of the Necronomicon's power. He keeps his insights into the occult secret from the police. Holmes plays the role of tirelessly following leads, deciphering codes in the senator's documents, and deductively revealing the cult's activities. His opium addiction occasionally causes judgment, complicating the case. Okay. Sure. Sometimes if we put too many specifics like this opioid addiction, the AI will bring it up all the time. Like if we include this in his character description and we're just writing a normal scene, it'll have him like be addicted to opioids, and we don't necessarily want that in everything. That's why I tend to keep the characters a little bit simpler when using AI, but there are a few things in particular that we want to specify. I'm going to read these through and see what else I want to change. Okay, I've added a little bit here about Tarzan to make sure that he is the way I want him to be. Specifically, I don't want him to be using broken English, so I added a little line in here about mastering the art of normal human speech, speaking like a normal British nobleman from the early 1900s, because that is who he is. And then another thing here, we obviously don't have a name for this cult defector. And so in Claude, I want to come here and say, can you give me, and let's say 10 possible names for the cult defector. And you can come up with these names yourself, but sometimes I like to look at what it gives me. All right, these aren't too bad. Victor von Helsing. How about, let's say, can you... So one of the things with names is it does generally tend to pick very general names. And a lot of them are names you will see in a lot of different things. And so a little trick that I use to try and get around that, can you give me 10 more names that start with A and include a C? Something like that. You can just say start with A. And this will give it just enough structure that it can't get as general with what it gives you. And so Archibald Chaswick, or Chazwick, Algernon Crawley. I like this one, Algernon Crawley. So we're going to replace cult defector with Algernon Crawley. This former acolyte of the cult leader escaped after witnessing unsettling occult practices and violence. Disillusioned but still afraid, they now live. We can change the pronoun now. He now lives anonymously under Tarzan's protection. The defector provides insider knowledge of rituals, leadership, and the Necronomicon's role, but Holmes suspects they still secretly believe in the cult's teachings and may have an agenda for the stolen book. All right, that's good enough for now. So what we want to do now is start taking each of these one by one and fleshing them out a little bit more. Now, like I said, with AI, we don't necessarily need to know everything about their backstory. If you want, you can flesh it all out yourself, and I'll do that with one of these just so you can see the process. But you don't necessarily need that. It can be helpful for you, the author, to understand some of that backstory to help you guide the writing a little bit better. But before I get into the fully fleshed out character profile, let's just take all 4 of these and I'll say the following are my edited versions of the characters you fleshed out. Can you, and this is something I'm experimenting with. I don't know how well it works, but so far it's showing promise. Can you give me the ideal Myers-Briggs personality type for each one, as well as their, all right, it's as well as their Enneagram type. And we'll see what it gives us for that. All right, it gave us the Myers-Briggs thing for each of them, as well as the Enneagram type for each of them. The reason I do these 2, because there are other well-known models as well, and you can use those as well. I'm not going to go overboard with them. But I like Myers-Briggs because I think it's a good general overview of personality, just as a general rule. And Enneagram works really good for fictional characters because the Enneagram has to do with your motivations. You know, what do you want? What do you fear? And that's an important thing to know for a character. And so this is something I usually like to include in the character types. And so, or just in the character instructions. And so what I'm going to do is take the character type, add it to like Sherlock Holmes here. This character has a Myers-Briggs type of, and then copy and paste that, as well as an Enneagram type of 5, the investigator for Sherlock Holmes, which I think is accurate. And then I'll just go ahead and add this to each of them as well. All right, so I've added that little bit about the personality type to each of their profiles here. Now, the reason I do this is because using a personality type like this, the AI knows a lot about these personality types. And so this is a way of getting across to the AI in as little words as possible a whole lot about this person's character. And so that should influence how they talk, how they behave, and different things like that. The last thing that we want to include on here is information about how each of these characters talks. And so we can go ahead and just say something like, can you give me a few lines of information about how each character speaks as well? You can start out with this. There's a good chance it's going to be a little bit general. All right, it actually gave me some pretty good things here, like crisp, clipped British accent with fast, logical tone reflecting his rapid thinking. That works for Sherlock. Frequently uses deductive reasoning out loud to work through clues. Okay. We can use that. It might be something we have to delete later on depending on how it affects the dialogue, because he might do it too much given the way the AI works. Can be blunt or even rude when focused intensely on solving a case. Again, yes, maybe we can put that there, but it might skew the results a little bit. Ultimately, we want to know more about like what his cadence is. And so I'm going to ask it to try again, even though this wasn't too bad, and I'll probably be pulling from it, and focus specifically on the structure of their language, such as their cadence, grammatical structure, education level of speech, etc. And this is the importance of using a framework. If I just ask it to tell it to write the dialogue better, you need to define what better means. And here it gave me a few things that are much, much better. And they're more technically based in their dialogue. Whereas a lot of these up here, we're talking more about the emotions that they give off, which is not necessarily what you want, because human beings have emotions that go all over the place, right? They're not always going to be the same. And so I don't really want to talk about what their emotions are in their character profile, because then they're always going to have that emotion no matter where they show up. There are a few things that I will pull from here from this initial thing, but ultimately I like these better, where it says things like simple grammar and direct word choices. And I don't want that one, but a slow, dramatic cadence with significant pauses, complex, meandering sentence structure with ornate vocabulary, keenly observant but circuitous in making his point, highly sophisticated in philosophical speech patterns. So these are the kind of things that I definitely want. Like with Sherlock Holmes here, we have fast staccato cadence reflecting his rapid thinking, complex sentence structure with precise technical vocabulary, all good things. And we definitely want to have information about how these characters talk, because that is going to influence how the AI treats these characters later on much more than it would otherwise. So I'm going to copy the little bits that I like here into my Atticus document and get back then. All right, so now I've got it the way I want it to be, and I'm just going to paste everything that I've got here in Atticus back into Claude. I'm saying the above is everything I've put together so far. With this in mind, write a short scene of just dialogue, nothing else besides the dialogue, just to emphasize that point, between the four characters. And I'm doing this so you can see what happens when you've done all this work on their personality types and everything. So let's see how that goes. Okay, so it gave us a quick scene between these characters, and oh my gosh, it's a little too much, but it definitely demonstrates how they all talk differently. So Holmes: Watson, what infernal racket outside disturbs my concentration? Watson: Apologies, Holmes. Our jungle friend Tarzan is practicing his hunting skills on the banister yet again. Tarzan: Arrow hit mark. Banister strong like rhino horn. This is why I was a little worried about just even including the word Tarzan, because I thought it would just default to the stereotype, like broken English Tarzan. I will probably change his name when we're actually writing the finished thing, because I don't necessarily want it to bring that stereotype in with it, but we'll see. Holmes: Do cease impaling my furnishings, savage charlatan. Any progress interrogating our cult informant? Tarzan: The snake Crawley sings no songs today. Crawley: My reticence stems from strictest necessity, not ill intent, dear friends. To utter secrets beyond the sanctum would render me Cain to the cult's wrathful god. Come now, Mr. Crawley, we mustn't lose hope. Your knowledge may well rescue the senator's daughter. Alas, to reveal all invites only deepest peril. I must again beseech your patience. Holmes: Enough obfuscation. Your former allies absconded with an innocent. Each moment of silence renders you accomplice to their sinister plot. Words bore Tarzan. We act now with or without snake's whispers. I shall fetch my blade. Stay violence for now, old boy. There are yet wise roads that spare bloodshed. Then pave them swiftly, doctor. The sands of time wait for no man, and this mystery begs revelation. It's a little over the top, but I think that's just because I didn't give it any guidance for what the scene is supposed to be about or anything like that. And so when I am actually writing the prose and the actual scenes, I will give it more guidance so it can hopefully use that. But none of these things are set in stone. You can adjust. And for instance, I'm noticing that Sherlock Holmes is very just irritated all the time here. And I think that's because of some of the things we put in his character profile. And that's something that we could just change. And, just don't mention anything about him being irritable. It's Sherlock Holmes, so it already knows a few things about him and how he should talk. But that just gives you an idea. I actually do like Crawley's dialogue a little bit. It's a little bit over the top, but it actually kind of works. And so I like that. I will be changing definitely a few things about this, but it gives you an idea of how this works. All right, now that we've got that out of the way, I think this is actually good to be getting along with. But let's say you actually want to create a full character profile. We're going to do it with Algernon. And we'll say, all right, now I'd like you to construct a full character profile for Algernon Crawley. Be sure to include a detailed character, detailed physical description, which is something you might want to include along with their dialogue and everything. You might want a little bit of information about what they look like. Detailed physical description, their character backstory, their motivations and fears, their personality, their hobbies, and other lifestyle choices. I don't know. You could just go to town on this. There's all sorts of things you can do, etc. And because I don't want it to give me a bunch of text, I'm going to say format this as a bulleted list. And just we'll just go with that and see what it gives us. So it actually gave us a pretty good description here. So the physical description: tall, slender build with sallow complexion. A little on the nose, but okay. Shoulder length black hair, dark penetrating eyes, also on the nose. So all of this you can change. And actually, I do recommend you take the information that it gives you and switch it around to your own flavor. And you can also just write all of this information yourself if you want, but it's important to have some of it. Aristocratic features but slightly unkempt appearance, prefers dark robes, cloaks, carries a walking stick. Backstory: born to an upper-class London family, showed promise as a youth, excelled at his studies, especially theology, philosophy, and esoteric subjects, became enthralled by accounts of the occult and joined the cult as a young man, rose quickly through the ranks due to intellect and fervent belief, witnessed disturbing rituals over the years that shook his faith, began having ideological splits with cult leadership, defected after being ordered to conduct human sacrifice. This is actually a decent backstory that isn't in anything we've written so far. It is kind of generic, but this is kind of a side character that we don't need anything particularly complex about their character. So we could just totally include this the way it is. Motivations and fears: seeks deeper meaning and purpose behind the veil of reality, wants power and knowledge offered by the occult forces, fears losing control or identity to sinister occult forces, afraid of violent retribution by the cult leadership, etc., 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 right? And so it actually did a pretty good job here. I like this. And I would keep most of this the way it is. Like I said, some of it is pretty generic. That's typical of AI. But unless you don't need it to be generic, it can still be super helpful for to flesh out some of these minor characters, to just let it be what it is, as long as there's nothing egregiously in conflict with any plans that you have. So I'm just going to copy this and include it here under Algernon Crawley. I could add more on these others, but I actually don't think I need to add anything for Sherlock, Watson, or Tarzan, because the AI already knows a lot about these characters. So we'll just leave it at that. But I think this about does it for this demonstration. I've got what I need for the main characters of the story, and then in the next video we can move on to the next step and really start digging into getting this story written, and I'll see you then.